Hi everybody, Mr. Allaire here, and in this podcast we're going to be talking about some basic anatomical terminology. These are terms that you're going to find useful while we're doing dissections in the biology classroom, as well as when we're talking about human anatomy and physiology. Now, before we get into some of these terms, I just want to remind you that we all come with probably the best study guide available, and that is our own bodies. So I really do want to encourage you to use your own body as a frame of reference, especially when we're talking about these different terms, so that way you can get a better understanding of what these terms mean and how they describe the position of different parts of our bodies. So now when we talk about terms and things like that, regular words like up, down, left, right, front, and back really don't have as much meaning as they do in regular conversation. We're still going to use them occasionally, but they really don't have as much, they're really not as good as other words, and that's because, just for instance, our bodies, we could be standing upright, we could be sitting down, we could be laying down face up, we could be laying down face down, we could even be laying down on our sides. So these words are going to change in their meanings depending on the position of the body. In addition, when we're doing dissections, these words may change depending on where you're standing in relation to a specimen that you're dissecting. So for that reason, we have what's called standard anatomical position. And this is, like you see on this slide, somebody standing upright with their palms and feet facing forward. And what this does is it gives us a standard frame of reference that we can use to describe all of the positions, movements, and planes that we use when talking about human anatomy. So we're going to talk about a few different terms here. And we're going to start with the difference between a body lying face up versus face down. When a body's lying face down, we call this the prone position, whereas when it's lying face up, we call this the supine position. And this is a really great example of why we don't really use terms like up, down, left, right, front, and back, even with just changing the way a body is lying, the meaning of some of these words changes too. Now, for the most part, when we do dissections, we will be dissecting with our specimen in the supine position. But occasionally we do dissect specimens in the prone position, particularly if we're looking at back muscles or vertebrae, spinal cords, and the brain, which we will do on occasion. Now, rather than talking about where something is located on the body, because again we try to avoid terms like left, right, front, and back, top and bottom, what we do is talk about body parts in relation to each other. And so we're going to be using some various terms here that you see on this diagram on this slide, and this diagram will follow us as we talk about some of these different terms. So let's just jump right in and talk about some terms, starting with superior versus inferior. Now, when we're talking about something superior versus inferior, and we can see this in our diagram right here, here's superior and here's inferior, and we can see that we have some arrows here. And that's because superior refers to something that is closer to the head versus inferior is something that's closer to the feet. So a really great example is going to be, for instance, eyes versus mouth. My eyes are superior to my mouth, meaning that my eyes are closer to my head than my mouth is. Conversely, my mouth is inferior to my eyes, simply meaning that my mouth is closer to my feet than my eyes are. That's all it means, is whether something is closer to the head or closer to the feet. Two other terms are anterior versus posterior, and this refers to whether something sits in front of or behind another structure. And that usually is whether we have to, in terms of dissections, whether we have to go through or move another structure to get to something else. So a really great example here would be my lungs versus my ribs. My ribs are anterior of my lungs, meaning that my ribs sit in front of my lungs, versus my lungs are posterior to my ribs, meaning that the lungs sit behind the rib cage, which is really good because my ribs provide a lot of protection to my lungs. Two additional terms refer to an invisible line that we can draw down the middle of our bodies, effectively dividing it into two sides. Now this is what we would call a unilateral line, and that's because we're dividing the body into two equal portions. So the terms medial and lateral, and we can see them right here on our diagram, refer to whether something is closer or farther away to this middle line. And there's my really bad arrow there. Sorry about that, guys. So medial refers to something being close to that middle line. So my nose is medial of my eyes, or my nose could be medial of my shoulders, meaning that my nose is closer to that midline than my shoulders are. Conversely, my shoulders are lateral of my nose, meaning that my shoulders are farther away from that midline than my nose is. Now, when we get to talking about things like the skeletal system, we're going to talk about the axial versus the appendicular skeletal system. The axial skeletal system refers to the skull, the thoracic cavity, and the abdomen, making up really the core of the body, whereas the appendicular skeleton is going to be my arms and my legs. And these terms distal and proximal refer to how close or far away a part is to the connection of the appendicular portion of the body to the core of the body. So we can see these terms here. I'll circle them on our diagram. Here is distal versus proximal. And we can see here with distal, we have an arrow that's pointing away from where the arm is connecting to the shoulder. And proximal, we have an arrow that's connecting towards where it connects. Now our legs are the same thing. Here's distal with an arrow pointing away, and here's proximal with an arrow pointing towards. So if we're talking about structures on the appendicular portion of our body, we could say something, for instance, like my elbow is proximal to my hand, which means that my elbow is closer to the connection point of my arm than my hand is. Conversely, my hand is distal to my elbow, meaning that the hand is farther away from the connection point than my elbow is. We could say the same thing with our legs. My knee is proximal to my feet, meaning that the knee is closer to the connection point, which would be your hips, than your feet are. Sorry about that. Conversely, we could say that the feet are distal to the knees, meaning again that the feet are farther away from the connection point than your knees are. Now I know these are a lot of terms, but actually this is a really small portion of the anatomical terminology that's out there. People studying to be doctors, nurses, and veterinarians will oftentimes spend an entire semester or a year just learning medical terminology. Now, two additional terms that I want to talk about that are going to be really important when we do dissections are superficial versus deep, and they're exactly what they sound like. Superficial is something that is really, really close to the surface versus something that is deep, is closer to the core of the body and underneath a lot of structures. So for instance, our organs are deeper than our muscles. Our muscles are deeper than our bones, or at least some of our muscles are. We could say that our bones are more superficial than our organs, meaning that our bones are closer to the surface of our body than our organs are. Now our two last terms I want to talk about are ventral versus dorsal, and these kind of take the place of front versus back. Ventral is towards the front or the belly, the abdominal cavity, and we can see this in our diagram right here. There we go. Here's our ventral cavity, versus our dorsal cavity is on the back, or the back side of our organism. Now, two easy ways of remembering this is that when we vent, when we yell and scream at somebody, we do that out of our noses and our mouths, and our nose and our mouth are in the front of our bodies, versus dorsal, which, like a dolphin or a fish or a shark, the dorsal fin is on their backs. So the dorsal side is our back, the ventral side is our front. Now, I want to give you guys a little bit of a quiz, but I don't expect you to answer these questions right now. Instead, you're going to go on to Edline and you're going to answer these on Edline. So, first of all, is the nose inferior or superior to the mouth? Is the heel of your foot anterior or posterior to your toes? Are the fingers of your hands distal or proximal to the palm? Is your shoulder medial or lateral to the navel, your belly button? And is your heart anterior or posterior to the ribs? Now that's not all. I do want to ask you some additional questions. And for those questions, you're going to use this diagram here. And again, you'll answer these on Edline. You'll see on the right-hand side here of what this diagram, I have numbers on various parts of this person's body. Numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And those go along with the letters that are on the right-hand side, right above me right now, where I ask you to label the medial surface of the arm, the lateral surface of the trunk, the lateral surface of the arms, the medial surface of the legs, the anterior surface of the trunk, and the superior surface of the head. So when you go on Edline, you're going to be answering these questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, that refer to this particular diagram. So one of the things that you should make sure to do is to go back and watch this podcast several times on YouTube as well as on Edline. And that's going to do it for some basic anatomical terms, and I hope you found this useful.